20 deaths here in Connecticut of those children and the 6 colleagues of mine should have been enough.
We have been begging Congress to take action for 10 years.
We are being held hostage by 50 senators in Washington who refuse to even put it to a vote, despite what we, the American people, want.
What are we doing? Why are you here, if not to solve a problem as existential as this?
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby?
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Those were voices this week reacting to the latest school shooting in Uvalde, Texas on Tuesday, where 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. We heard from Sandy Hook survivor Mary Ann Jacobs, Poe Murray, Newtown Action Alliance chairwoman, NBA Warriors head coach Steve Kerr, Connecticut U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, and President Biden. Today, Where We Live, we want to hear from you. How are you and your family responding to this latest tragic shooting? Or how are you pushing for change? You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Now, after the deaths at Sandy Hook Elementary School, gun laws were tightened here in Connecticut, and Democrats pushed for federal reform. Nearly a decade later, many Americans remain frustrated that federal legislation has stalled and mass shootings continue. The Gun Violence Archive has counted 212 mass shootings so far just in 2022, 27 of those happening at schools. One reason for the inaction in Congress is powerful lobbying from the National Rifle Association. Coming up, we hear from a former firearms executive turned critic about what needs to change. Ryan Bussey, author of Gunfight, joins us later. First, when school shootings happen elsewhere, schools and staff must respond. They soothe, they protect, and they worry. What if this happens in my school? It's an unfair burden to put on educators, but it's the reality in the United States. We wanted to take time to hear from Connecticut teachers. Joining us first on Zoom is Lisa Cordova. She's a kindergarten teacher at Glastonbury East Hartford Magnet School, that's pre-K through grade 5, and she's president of the CREC Education Association. Lisa, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
How long have you been a teacher, Lisa?
This is my 32nd year teaching.
That's a long time.
It is a long time, but it goes by quickly.
So I wanted to ask what your reaction was when you heard about the school shooting in Uvalde. Where were you?
Well, I was home. I had had a busy day, so I had not watched the news. And then when I got home, I saw like a little span underneath like the TV. And I said, oh my goodness. And honestly, it brought me back to the day I found out about Sandy Hook. It just tore me apart. Like you just get chills. And it really threw me for a loop. It's been a rough year, and this was just one more thing that really affected my mental health, honestly.
And so the next day, you have to be back in the classroom. What was that like to be back in the school, knowing that this has happened again?
Last week, we actually had a training, like an ALICE training, how to prepare for these things. And so when I got in, I actually walked in my room and I checked my plan. All right, if something were to happen, how am I going to get the kids out of here? How am I going to keep them safe? I teach kindergarten, so they're at an age that they don't know how to process information, right? They don't know the difference between reality and fiction and non-realities. So basically, we didn't really discuss it. We just talked about being safe and how we love each other, and we move it forward to keep them learning.
So you mentioned that you looked at your exit plan, and this is something that teachers and principals, school boards have been thinking about as these mass shootings continue. I'd mentioned 27 school shootings so far this year. I mean, it's hard to fathom, but that's what the numbers have been, especially since Columbine. And so when you think about, again, the fact that you have to have a response plan, That must make you angry.
It makes it so frustrating, right? I've been teaching 32 years. When I first got into teaching, you were just full of hopes and dreams, right? Of what you can do for the students. And now you're also added, how am I going to keep them safe from things, external things that I have no control over, such as somebody coming into the building to intentionally hurt them. So yeah, it's super frustrating. And it's very frustrating when they don't make any new laws to curb the gun violence, such as background checks. That to me seems like a no-brainer.
Can you talk more about the kids in your class? So when we think about kindergarten, so anywhere from like 4 to 6-year-old children, and when you think about even what they've been through in the pandemic, how it's hard for them at their age to distinguish, telling the difference between fact and fiction.
Right. So the students I have now are 5 and 6 years old. So when the pandemic hit, they were 2 and 3 years old. At that time, nobody was leaving their house. They were watching a lot of YouTube and television. So some of the things on YouTube and television are real and some are not real. So I feel like they have not been able to understand reality because they were sent back and forth to these different types of shows or videos and things like that. So when they came to me in September, a lot of them had trauma, and a lot of them had no skills as to how to interact with each other because they literally did not have play dates. They were all home and they only stayed with their family unit. And if they went out, it was only with their family unit. So that provides a lot of trauma too. We've worked really hard this year with social workers and with our lessons to, again, move them forward to get them back on track so they can be, fun learners and enjoy school, because that's where they should be.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that, when these school shootings happen, it's not good for your mental health. Obviously, the mental health of children has been strained over the last 2 years. Do you feel like you have enough support? What do you want to hear from state leaders about the kind of supports that you and your colleagues also need in the classroom?
Our colleagues and I really need to make sure that we have the best protections in our building. Do we have state-of-the-art locks? Do we have a safety place where we can shut things in if we need to get out and we need to block somebody from coming in? Do people understand the mental health of the students, right? And how we can make sure they get the needs that they get so they're not the ones in 10 years or 15 years doing this type of sad action.
It's been nearly a decade since Sandy Hook. When you talk about making sure that leaders know that resources, including making sure that you have locks in your school, there are still places where teachers and staff don't feel safe. They don't have enough safeguards in place, Lisa?
Well, with CREC, most of our schools are state-of-the-art and they're mostly brand new. But you feel as a person coming into the building, like, is that the best lock? Are the doors locked at every moment? It takes 1 second for somebody to run to their car. You're like, I just gotta grab my lunch, right? And then somebody watching, like, your head goes into places where you really don't want to be. So you just want to make sure that everything you have is state of the art so that you feel as protected as you can be, right?
You mentioned earlier that you've been teaching for 32 years. How much longer do you think that you'll be teaching, Lisa?
Well, that's a great question. At the beginning of the year, I would have said I'm going to last until I'm at least 60. I love the kids. I love teaching. I love it. But it is definitely wearing on me. And I want to make sure that the students have the best instructional leader that they can have. So right now, I'm going to keep going. This year is coming to an end. I'm going to be able to reassess and get myself moving for next year. So I'm hoping to make it to 60 because I do love what I do. But I, to be honest with you, I have been checking my investment portfolio. I have, been putting things in place in case one day I'm like, you know what, I need a break. So that's where I'm at. But I do love teaching. Teaching's the best job you can ever have. I love the children.
Well, thank you, Lisa Cordova, for sharing a little bit of your story with us. And we wish you and your colleagues the best as the school year gets to a close just in another less than a month.
Yes, I know. Well, that's another thing that brought up, right, for today. Those teachers in Texas, today was their last day of school. This is our happiest time of the year. And I feel for them because now that's taken away forever. But so let's get through. I'm hoping that Congress will come together to pass laws so we can all feel safe and educate our children the way they should be educated.
Thank you, Lisa Cordova, kindergarten teacher with Glastonbury East Hartford Magnet School. Now, producer Katie Pellico reached out to a former guest on the show, Dr. Dave Bosso. He's a Berlin social studies teacher and 2012 Teacher of the Year. Let's take a listen.
And it's just so difficult to adequately describe what many teachers and so many others beyond the classroom are feeling. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's numbing. It's maddening. It's nightmarish. And there are so many people who are reliving the nightmare. Teachers have experienced layer upon layer upon layer of expectations and responsibilities. And, it's worth asking, what are others doing, especially those who are in position to do something about it. I think teachers are scared. We're exhausted. Yet at the same time, we are expected and we need to be strong and hopeful for our students. But I wonder, should we continue to fly our flags at half mast every day? Is that ever going to change? Is it more accurate to ask kids, what are they going to be if they grow up? It's just so disparaging.
Again, that's Dr. Dave Bosso, a Berlin social studies teacher. After the break, we'll continue to hear from another longtime educator, and you can join us too, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We're spending time this hour to hear from you in the wake of another school shooting, this time in Uvalde, Texas. You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also share a comment on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter at Where We Live. Noelle in Bridgeport emailed and shared, I have few words but extremely strong feelings of frustration, disgust, and despair. I know people still living with the effects of the trauma of Sandy Hook. I'm feeling a strong desire to leave this country. We're also taking time to hear from educators in Connecticut. Now, Columbine in 1999 is often brought up as a turning point in America when it comes to school mass shootings. Our state would become the site of the deadliest school shooting in the U.S. at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012. My next guest was teaching in our state on that day. Joining us now on Zoom is Sheena Graham, a 2019 Connecticut Teacher of the Year. She retired in January after 38 years as a performing arts and music teacher in K through 12 public schools, primarily in Bridgeport. Sheena, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
First off, 38 years. Congratulations on that long career, Sheena. You must have made such an impact on so many in that time.
Well, I know that the students made a great impact on me as well. And 38 years, yes, it is a long time. Schools have changed a lot over that period.
You taught students of all ages, including in your hometown of Ansonia. And so I know that you've retired now, but when you saw or heard the news about Uvalde, what was your reaction?
Oh boy, it brought me back in time to Sandy Hook immediately. I can clearly remember that was a Friday. We were in the midst of preparing for a show. We used to do children's theater and would invite the elementary students in. So we had our dress rehearsal that day. And when Monday came and the school buses pulled up and the children began to pass through the lobby, at that point I was at Central High School, it seemed as if time froze. You know, the adults in the building, the students in the hallway, everyone just stopped. And we watched these little children pass by us, and it just made everything that took place in Sandy Hook even more real, harder to deal with. After watching them go through the lobby and head to their seats, I had to go backstage, and we huddled up, the teenagers and myself, to see how we were going to get through this together. And the thing that got us through was that for a moment, for a short period of time, we could provide some joy to someone else. And in doing so, help us to get through that moment.
So that was nearly a decade ago, and since that time, more emphasis, as we heard from Lisa earlier, having an exit plan if a shooter were to come into the building. You know, children now are going through lockdown drills. What has that meant to you? The toll that has taken on you, the stress of also having to worry about that when you were an educator?
You know, it does add an extra layer to what your responsibilities are. I think teachers are naturally nurturing individuals. We care for our students so much, and we take in, you know, their pain, just everything about them. We feel responsible for their growth. Trying to keep them safe is challenging. Schools are designed so differently. So for instance, moving from one school to the next, one school I might have windows, but the other one I don't. One classroom might have two ways to exit, the other one doesn't. One, you might be able to shelter kids, like there might be a spot in the room where you cannot be seen. And then in the next one, there's no such thing. So it does put an extra burden on educators for ways to keep their students safe.
What do you want to see change, Sheena?
There's got to be a change in how weapons are accessed. And I know there are black markets and all that other stuff, but sometimes it seems as though it's just too easy. The young man in this last case, being able to, right after his birthday, make those purchases. And I don't know who said it, but one person said, you know, he's not old enough to legally drink, but he's old enough to buy those weapons. There's got to be a change.
Do you miss teaching, Sheena?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I miss my students so much. A lot of them were still in contact because once you're my student, you're mine for life. So even my early on students, it's embarrassing to admit, but a lot of my former students have grandchildren now. And so, you know, we're in contact on Facebook. So I definitely miss the students. I miss teaching. Something that was said earlier is, you know, we want to keep our students safe. And I think that's part of what had me retire when I did, is it was becoming harder to keep them safe. You know, when COVID hit, it brought a whole new level to trying to keep students safe. And I think that takes a toll.
Do you worry about your colleagues who are still teaching, Sheena? Definitely. In fact, with this latest shooting, as being a teacher of the year, you become part of a cohort that stretches across our entire country. So
every time something happens in another state, you have family in that state, because that's how it feels to be part of that cohort. And so when this one took place, it's actually in an area where the 2019 Texas Teacher of the Year is. And
Wow.
he knows people there. He is in that school building sometimes. So it's it's never any one person's issue or any one state's issue or one city or town. This belongs to all of us, and it belongs to all our legislators as well.
You know, a lot of people are frustrated about inaction that they see in Washington. But for people who are listening in our state that has passed stronger gun laws, we have a congressional delegation that supports federally stronger gun laws, there's still a feeling of, what can we do? What would you say to them?
Right. That's a tough one, because as an individual, it's difficult. Collectively, we have more power. I am so proud of Connecticut for putting in place the legislation that it has. And I actually had tears in my eyes listening to Mr. Murphy when he was saying, what are we doing? What is it going to take for us to make that move? I'm hoping that, I've heard it went viral, and I'm hoping it does, and that will make the country collectively work together to make some change happen, because that's what it's going to take. We all have to own it. And as I said, and that includes the legislators for the entire country, we all have to own it.
Meanwhile, it's left to schools and teachers and staff to protect children. I wanted to share what Erin shared with us. She's a K-4 literacy interventionist at Hartford Public Schools. She wrote in part, "We walked into our school today," that's Wednesday, "to find locked classroom doors, maintenance people checking alarms, and emails about upcoming shelter-in-place drills. For too long, the work has been left up to teachers and school children to practice and prepare to face the unthinkable. The lives of our children should no longer be a part of political debates, power struggles, or thoughts and prayers devoid of action. We have to know that it's not a matter of if it will reach your own community, your friends, or your family. It's only a matter of when. When we continue to allow unfettered access to weapons, we pay with the lives of the most innocent." Sheena, how do you respond?
That is, I couldn't say it more powerfully than that. It is the lives of our children that are at stake. And as educators, I know what it is. My classroom door was locked all the time. The hardest part to face is when you walk in after one of these situations or one of these occurrences, and you have all kinds of children sitting in front of you with different views. Some are afraid, some are like, oh no, I could handle it. They're in denial. And somehow you have to bring them all to a place of peace and then attempt to teach for that day. It's very challenging. It's challenging to everyone in the building. So it's not just the educators and the students, but the administrators who have the burden of overseeing everyone else. For the custodians who have the burden of making sure everything is locked down. And some of the schools have so many entrances and exits. The security, you name it. It's the counselors that are just overloaded with the everyday concerns, and now they have this on top of that. So it is a tough situation, and I am so proud of each and every person that is working in the field, because it is the best profession, I believe, I might be biased, in the world. and to be willing to take all of that on to benefit our students is an honorable thing to do.
That's Sheena Graham, another Connecticut Teacher of the Year. She's a performing arts and music educator in K through 12 public schools, primarily in Bridgeport. She just retired in January after 38 years as an educator. Sheena, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for having me.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. Now, after the break, we change our focus and talk about the inaction of Congress to pass meaningful gun laws that can help prevent additional mass shootings. We talked to a former firearms executive turned critic about the power of the NRA and what needs to change. Ryan Busse, author of Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America, joins us. What questions do you have? You can join us too, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. My next guest says it's time for responsible gun owners to save our democracy. Ryan Busse was a longtime gun manufacturing executive, but he left the industry in 2020, becoming an outspoken critic of the National Rifle Association and an industry that he says changed over the last 20 years, abandoning a code of responsibility that it once adhered to. He told the New York Times when Sandy Hook happened, it was, quote, a decisive moment for him. Busse is the author of Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. He joins us now on Zoom. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I wish I didn't need to write a book, and I wish I didn't need to be here chatting with you today, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Mm. I mentioned that you were top brass in the gun manufacturing industry for more than 20 years. And so give us a glimpse of your experience and what inspired you to speak out now, Ryan.
Well, I think it's important for people to know, certainly I get this question like how did we end up here? And I think the story in my book and the story of my life is illustrative of how that happened. I grew up on a rural ranch, and guns were a central part of my life. In fact, they came to represent a good and healthy part of my life because we worked hard, and so many of the things, we didn't have a lot of time to have fun. When we did have fun, a lot of times it involved guns, hunting or shooting with my dad or my brother or my grandfather. But it was always done in a very responsible and decent way. Safety was always at the forefront. And when I entered the industry in 1995, that same sort of decency and belief in social norms still existed in the firearms industry, and there were many self-imposed rules and regulations, laid over the top and demanded by the industry trade group, the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And over time, that broke down in favor of profits at all costs, driven by the NRA, which sought to win elections at all costs. And the tools that were used to do both of those things have had disastrous impacts on our country.
Hmm. Can you go back? You'd said that the code of responsibility, the way that the firearms industry even approached conferences and gun shows, and some of those rules that were followed, they went out the window. Can you describe more about what you mean, especially when we hear about these latest gunmen in their tactical gear?
A very illustrative example certainly has been brought to the fore in the last 14 days. In as late as 2006 and 2007, the industry trade group, which governs the SHOT Show, which is composed of all of industry companies, would not allow tactical gear of any sort or tactical advertisements of any sort to be displayed in its own SHOT Show, which is one of the largest trade shows in the world. That's the largest annual industry trade show. You could view those things and the marketing, but you had to be a law enforcement or military personnel, and you had to have credentials to prove that. And it was in a cordoned off small section of the trade show. So the industry knew, somewhere in its DNA, still knows that proliferation of tactical gloves, plate carriers, bulletproof vests, helmets, all of this militarization stuff that we've seen now two horrific mass shooters use and wear as part of a kind of costume or get up, and then obviously a defensive and offensive use as well, was not even allowed by the industry itself, by the industry's own rules. And I have to assume that that was a very conscious decision because the industry knew the dangers that could arise.
You have talked about also how the NRA responded after Columbine in 1999. Ironically, after Uvalde, there's another NRA conference scheduled in Houston. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that moment when the NRA had to respond and how it responded and how it became a part of the playbook now for the last 2 decades.
Yeah, in April of 1999, we had a situation that's not sadly not dissimilar from the one that our country is facing right now. Columbine happened in April, and just about 8 or 9 days later, the NRA was scheduled to have its annual convention in Denver, just a few miles away from Columbine. And as we look back now through uncovered tapes and internal NRA documents, we see that was a turning point for our country and for my life. Obviously, I didn't know it, and it happened slowly at first. But the NRA had internal debates with its top leadership: Jim Baker, Chris Cox, Wayne LaPierre, several other lobbyists, and public affairs professionals, and they had an option to either play ball, be conciliatory, look for solutions, or double down and say, hell no, we're not doing anything. Let's turn this into an advantage. The industry will come with us. If we say we're being attacked over this, perhaps we could drive sales. Perhaps this is a way to stoke the culture war. And obviously they selected the second of those options to great disastrous effect, not just on guns, but on our entire political, ecosystem.
You've been pretty outspoken about how the NRA has that came upon this idea that fear and conspiracy and hatred of others can be used to drive and win political races and in turn drive up sales. Can you talk more about that, Ryan?
Yeah, a lot of people, I've heard it reported in air that the NRA is an arm of the firearms manufacturers. My experience in the firearms industry is that it's exactly the opposite of that. The NRA essentially unofficially runs the entire show, including the firearms industry, not in a sort of a management meeting memo kind of official way, but somewhere subconsciously industry members in the NSSF stumbled onto this idea that the same things that the NRA used to get the worst out of people, gin them up into a almost, voters and eventually America into a just 1 degree below boiling over fear and racism and conspiracy theories and all the stuff that we see propagated across our country now, that those things could also be used to drive gun sales. And so there became a very tight symbiosis between the industry and NRA, and the NRA led the way. And if you doubt this, I challenge you to find, well, first off, my book is the only one ever written and really encapsulates almost all of the dissent from any industry insider ever. I think that's amazing. How can that happen with an industry? So you can see how tight that political police state is. And that would be lent to the Trump administration too. Just ask Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney how it works now. And here we are where that sort of all or nothing politics has invaded everything we care about: climate policy, women's reproductive rights, right down to local school boards. We've got it bad.
You're hearing Ryan Busse here on Where We Live, a former firearms executive, now an outspoken critic of the industry and the National Rifle Association. He's the author of Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. You can join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. And so you explain there's a real clear cause and effect relationship when we think about the NRA and the lack of stronger federal gun laws. Tell us more about, what needs to change here.
Well, we're in a culture war. There are policy changes for sure, but a lot of what we've seen is a breakdown in social norms. For instance, open carry across the United States is now prolific. We've seen it in Michigan and Kentucky and Virginia, my home state of Montana. My book opens with my own son being threatened by an air quotes here, Second Amendment patriot with an open carry gun, intimidating and pushing my son at a Black Lives Matter rally. And democracy does not exist at the barrel of a gun. And so we've seen these breakdown in norms. Obviously, there are also policies that need to be instituted. I do want to say I'm not a fan of this idea that we can solve gun violence because I don't think we solve things in democracies, especially complex democracies with freedoms like we enjoy and wish to enjoy. What we can do is institute policies that make things marginally better. We've done it in so many areas of our lives. A couple I can think of, cigarettes and tobacco. We still have lung cancer and we still have abuse of tobacco and we still have some bad health effects from tobacco. But 15 or 18 years ago, we decided to take actions that made our tobacco and cigarette situation marginally better. Is it perfect? No. Did we solve it? No. But have we made it better? I think so. I think of traffic. It's an important freedom. We like to drive our cars. We want to get across town. We have places to go. It's an important freedom for most people to be able to transport themselves in their own vehicle. But we don't think it's okay to drive through town at 100 miles an hour, especially through a 25 mile an hour school zone, because we're responsible, because we need regulations, because we care more about live kids than dead ones. And I think those are two illustrative examples about how freedoms still exist, but we've taken marginal actions to make things better instead of worse. And I think those are the sorts of things we have to do now here on guns.
You've said many times that this is how the system is meant to work. And so when you heard about Uvalde, do you believe that it's just a matter of time that there'll be another school shooting, Ryan?
I believe it's a matter of time before there'll be a dozen more school shootings. Very sad. I don't know how we can keep, as I have said, I don't know how we can keep pumping lighted matches and cans of gasoline into a closed system and expect that we don't have explosions. We're always going to have a few, but we just must stop with the purposeful pumping in of both accelerant and lighted match.
When we think about the NRA today, I know that at one point it had entered into bankruptcy court. And so what is the role of the NRA today?
I think the demise of the NRA has been drastically overstated. You mentioned that the NRA convention is getting ready to happen, and the NRA has been in the news. Many of us have read books and seen news reports about the incredible malfeasance, and I think we all know about the overt, divisive, angry, race-baiting politics that the NRA has propagated. And yet, if you look at the NRA attendee list, every single major gun manufacturer and their executives will be at the NRA supporting them, just like they always have. I think of the NRA much like I think of Trump, because I think in many ways it's exactly the same system. The NRA developed the system and handed it off to the political right. But NRA may be weakened. I'm dubious about how weak it is, but the NRA-ism is not weakened, much like Trump may be not elected, but Trump-ism doesn't seem to be weakened all that much. And so it's not dissimilar from a prairie fire that has, been lit, and we have a dry wind blowing. And even if the source is behind us, the fire is still burning.
So while the organization may not be as healthy as it once was in terms of membership and fundraising, the politics of the NRA has certainly not gone away. It's raging still, Ryan.
Yeah, I believe that. My book, I essentially make the point that everything that we experience now in our divided politics with our families and our workplaces and things that we've all experienced, especially in the last 5 years, really has its roots in the all or nothing culture war politics of the NRA. If you go back, I believe I lived in the kitchen where this was all cooked up. And in that way, I think that this is the penultimate political issue of our time. We must figure out a way to not only to save lives, but to save everything else that we care about. I'm very, very passionate about the environment and about climate change. And I know that if we cannot roll back the politics, the all or nothing politics of the NRA, we cannot make improvements on something as simple and foundational as democracy and safety and lives of innocent children, I don't think we're going to make a lot of progress on climate or on women's reproductive rights or on, again, I mentioned local school boards, right? We have to break this down. So I think working on this issue for me is the penultimate project.
Again, you're hearing Ryan Busse here on Where We Live, a former firearms executive, now an outspoken critic of the industry and the National Rifle Association. He's written the book Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. Jonathan's calling in from Greenwich. Jonathan, what's your question?
Thanks, Lucy, for covering this really important issue from a variety of angles, and Ryan for your work. I had a question for Ryan about smart gun technology. I know firearm manufacturers have been pretty resistant to adopting it, even though a lot of people believe that really could prevent a lot of gun death and injury from unauthorized users of guns. And so I'm just wondering what his thoughts are on what the problems are in terms of getting the industry to adopt that technology and what some alternative solutions might be to getting there.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because in most industries, that sort of technological advancement would be like a holy grail. And so I think the thing that keeps it from happening is that there are conspiracy theories that build up around if there are a battery in a gun, might it fail? If there are electronics in a gun, might the government be able to shut it off? And I know this sounds silly, right? We walk around with our phones all the time. But this sort of fearful nature of the way guns are carried and used often means that people think they're going to need them at a moment's notice, and nothing, no modernity can be in your way to slow that down, a password. Now, I think it's foolish. I think we can get there, but those are the sorts of cultural that you see how the same sort of conspiracy theory and fear that drives the NRA and our political system also keeps us from adopting this modern technology.
Again, you're hearing Ryan Busse here on Where We Live. If you have a question, you can join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. How did you reconcile your role in the firearm industry, Ryan? You're now an outspoken critic, but you've also written about how you helped lead a boycott against, I believe, Smith & Wesson when it worked with the Clinton administration over concessions on marketing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I rationalized it. It became increasingly difficult. That's why I left. That's why I wrote a book about it all. But the sort of healthy culture that I grew up with, I formed up and helped build a company in its early stages based around things and activities that I still believe in. High quality guns. We didn't engage in incendiary advertisements. We didn't sell AR-15s. We didn't and the company I work for still doesn't. And so it's not perfect, but I rationalize it that, look, I have the right to fight for my version of responsible gun ownership. And in fact, maybe it's better that I stay here and fight for it, because if I leave, I'll be the only one. And I know this sounds a lot like, Trump cabinet officials that stay. Unlike Trump cabinet officials, I was speaking out. I was fighting. I was trying to weaken the NRA because they were trying to steal, in my opinion, in the way I looked at, they were trying to steal something sacred from me and from other responsible gun owners like me.
You've mentioned being a responsible gun owner, and you say it's time for them to speak up. So tell us more about, how that will impact, again, what has become so polarizing in our country.
Well, the NRA has successfully, I don't know how, because it just sounds so foolish to say it, but the NRA and their political messaging has established this system now where people believe that background checks are in some way anti-gun or communist or socialist, or that flag laws are, or that all of these things that are just reasonable limits on a freedom, not unlike a school zone when you drive across town. And I simply refuse to believe those definitions. They're just absolutely crazy. Every freedom we have is tempered by some sort of regulation or responsibility. And to think that this one can be absolute, if it ends up being absolute, I can tell you eventually we'll have no rights because our democracy will fall around it. So everything that we have must be tempered, and that's the way I look at it. And in some ways, I'm more pro-gun than all these people, all these radicals who define themselves as pro-gun, because I will do what it takes. I will fight for what it takes to keep people safe and to have a vibrant democracy. If we let this go much further, we won't have a vibrant democracy.
Getting back to that NRA conference in Houston, what do you expect will be said, especially just days after this latest tragedy in Uvalde?
I think my guess is there'll try to be some half-assed conciliatory talk from somebody. I don't think it'll be very convincing. I can tell you that if you were in the aisles, again, the sort of prairie fire that the NRA has let from attendees and radicals, you would hear some very, very disturbing talk about the degree to which this is nobody's fault except for some shooter, or you'll probably even hear crisis actor talk like we heard after Sandy Hook, because once a group of radicals has been set on its course, and the NRA has certainly done that, you can't always control them. So even if the NRA tries to temper it a little bit, I think this is horrible enough that they may try to, they may not throw as many punches as they normally do, but I can tell you, you're going to hear some pretty incendiary stuff if you were on the floor there.
Again, that's Ryan Busse, a former firearms executive, now an outspoken critic of the National Rifle Association and the firearms industry. He's the author of Gunfight, My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. Ryan, thank you for your time today on the show.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the thoughtful and intelligent discussion. So best to everyone.
I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical director is Kat Pastor. We'll be back tomorrow.